started here. This is recording to the Saturn Atelier website. Just going to start talking for a little bit. This is a short talk I do weekly about any design ideas I have. I try to relate it to Charlotte design community. And this week I'm just talking about siloing of design and the industries that are involved in that. So it just started with an idea that that we have so much talent within so just looking at kind of the individual field of architecture, of design rather, and trying to put the umbrella on that very, very large category. I see it, I've kind of broken it down as the employer-based designers and the kind of community and government-supported designers. And the issue I see is that are these two groups unnecessarily separated, at least at the beginning. So you have the employed designers like graphic designers, industrial designers, architects, industrial interior designers, user interface experience designers. And then on the community side, you kind of have your traditional artists, your photographers, your painters, your sculptors, musicians, just anybody that makes quote-unquote art that you pin up and people go see. And it just doesn't seem like there's any overlap in those spaces. Like life is very busy. Like for the employed designers, the employer-based designers, it's like you work 8 hours plus. I mean, a lot of architecture firms are notorious for working 60-hour weeks, and the further you get up into those fields, the more you have to work. So you're just stuck working. By the time you get off, you're not trying to find a community of designers. You're trying to drink a beer, you're trying to watch sports, you're trying to do anything but get your mind off of kind of how your employment has siphoned off all of your design community aspirations. And with the community-based designers, it's more of you're kind of more focused on always having that conversation with the community. You want everybody to see your stuff. You're always publicly exhibiting your work. Whereas the employed designers, it's like, okay, I'm doing this big project for Adidas, but I can't actually literally legally tell anybody about it because I have an NDA, my company, we have a legal department, blah, blah, blah. So I can't even share sketches of what I'm working on. I can't share, and I'm putting the most design ever, the most critical thinking I'm putting into this stuff, I cannot share until I'm looking for a new job and put it on my portfolio, because I'm an employed designer and I'm siloed by my employer. So it's just kind of this disconnect where, and I think the biggest, here in Charlotte, the biggest place where that the community actually is able to interact before the pandemic was the Creative Morning Charlottes. And you had, if you looked at the roll call, which I don't know who does, but I do, if you look at who actually attends the Creative Morning Charlottes, you have all of these employed designers. You have people that work for Boone Oakley. You have people that work for Ray Ward. You have people that work for Gensler and Perkins Eastman and all these big name firms. And you also have, Dammit Wesley. You also have DeVita Galloway. You also have Harvey Cummings. You have these community artist designers, and you have these people. Usually the employed ones are coming to watch, and it's usually a community designer that's presenting. Sometimes it's a little different, but that's the only intermixing you have. And it was an amazing thing when I found it. It's like, wow, you get to see kind of the other side of design. You know, I always wonder that. It's like, okay, you have these great Instagram, graphic designers, and you have these, and you wonder how great could like Steve Smith that works at Boone Oakleaf, an ad company. Imagine if he didn't work there and he was busting his butt every day inside the community, making graphic design for Charlotte instead of for Boone Oakleaf. Could he be the greatest graphic designer in Charlotte? But you'll never know that because he's working on a project in Nashville. He's working on a project in San Francisco and Shanghai. And by the time that even is published or released or he's able to even share it, it's just like, okay, it's been slapped with so many levels of corporate branding and such through a lens of the way that it just kind of minimizes the designer. Okay, this is a Boone Oakley design. This isn't a Steve Smith design. I don't mean to pick on Boone Oakley. That's all I can think of right now. But so where there's so much disconnect, and I guess the reason I even think about this, the way it stems is I don't see kind of the people I went to school with at Virginia Tech that are in Charlotte now, design-wise or design community-wise, nowhere to be found. It's like they work their jobs. They do a great job, They go off, get their licenses, and I'm speaking broadly here, not targeted at anyone, but get your license, doing your good job, you're working at your firm, you see bits and pieces of what they work on cryptically, but it's like, man, we're architects, or we're studying to be architects. Where is our guidance, or where is our input inside of the creative community in Charlotte? And that just seems like a shame that there's no voice there. Because, as architects, we're supposed to know so much about our community. We're supposed to be critics of the community. And I was just thinking the other day, is like, the biggest architectural critic in Charlotte is David Furman. And he barely do you hear his name unless you're really into kind of politics of development in Charlotte. That's the only time you kind of hear that name. He kind of made a big splash with his micro apartments in South End, the Centro City Works. That's not what they're called. I forgot what it was called, but it was the micro apartments in South End that were meant to be a little more affordable. They came out to be like $1,200, $1,300 for a studio, but that's an architect that's interfacing with the community a little bit. But that only comes, I accidentally subscribed to the Charlotte Business Journal, which is expensive. They kind of roped me in on a trial offer, but that's the only place you kind of see that designer community newspaper involvement. So the question is, how is it possible that these should be the same pool of people, the employed designers and the community designers? And how do you facilitate these pools of people intermingling and kind of, the radical idea is that it's the same pool of employees that these employers and these government and artist residencies are targeting. So imagine if somebody that works at Perkins Eastman, an architecture firm in Charlotte, imagine if after a couple of years working at Perkins Eastman, they get the opportunity to work at the McCall Center in for a half-year residency, you know. So the one thing I see that the problem with that is when you're working for an employer in the design field, your work is so manicured, you know. So it's like, okay, maybe you're a good graphic designer, maybe you're a good artist, but you've worked for Perkins Eastman for 5 years, and all you have to show for your work is a couple of floor plans, a couple of facades. I mean, none of this has anything to do, I mean, it's hard to see the connection with kind of a more artistic and design-based approach to things, because you've been low-key a CAD monkey and pushing paper for a while. So I think that's the biggest obstacle to that, but it would be so awesome. I mean, you read in history about these anti-architecture firms in a way. Archizoom from Italy in the, I believe it was the 70s, Archigram from the British, United Kingdom. You had the, what's it called, Memphis Design from Italy as well. They have a lot of subversive design groups. So how do you get a community together? And maybe maybe this happens in New York, maybe this happens in LA, maybe this happens in a bigger city like Chicago, but how do you in Charlotte bring together a group of designers, a group of people with a various set of skills like that, to where you can make these architectural proposals, such as a city that walks, or this interesting furniture that kind of subverts what it means to have social gatherings? Because that's not just a problem for an industrial designer or an architect or a painter. They can all involve their talents to create those solutions and those proposals and those community conversations. So that's kind of where that stems from. I was reading about Archizoom yesterday, and it's like, man, where did they find the time, the place, the community to create these groups like that, to where they're so public facing, to where they're sending out treaties on architecture and the way we live. I don't know who's doing that right now in Charlotte, and it's only the community designers, the photographers, the painters, the musicians. Whereas the siloed designers that are working for the employers, all of their talent is going to these projects that aren't going to be realized for a couple of years, and their name is not really on it, you know. But so, and the way, let's just talk a little more idealistic. We're talking about these employed versus siloed. How could it work in an idealized world? So maybe the institutions that these employed designers go to, we see less and less of an importance in that. So you have YouTube University. Anybody can learn the things that these siloed designers used to learn in their siloed schools. So the information isn't siloed anymore. So once the information isn't siloed, okay, maybe you have good professors. Okay, sure, I'll give you that. School is really good for networking. Sure, I'll give you that. People trust degree. It means a lot. But if the design, if you're not producing people that are really changing the world or changing their communities with their design, then kind of what is the specialty in hiring for the employer on the employer side? What's the specialty in hiring these siloed designers versus a painter that has traveled the world already, has some perspective, has some fresh takes, and has a little bit of an opinion, you know? It's honestly hard to get through architecture school with an opinion, which is not a bad thing, because you go through school and you're blasted with all of these differing opinions, and you really have to take a step back and look. But it kind of makes you numb to everything, and you get so focused on your hours and your testing to get your license. So anyway, in an idealized world, so maybe YouTube University is it. Maybe you have a University of Vitra Design, which is all online, which is all free, and it's a community. So it's like, okay, I can decide my community, and I can kind of learn from that vein of thought. Because you need a little bit of opinion and specialization to kind of get somewhere as a designer. But at the same time, when you're young like that, you should be dabbling in all kinds of skills. I was on a Clubhouse talk with a lot of shoe designers, and there's this guy that said, he went to Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, but he knew he wanted to do sneakers. At the time, they didn't really have a footwear program, but he got his degree in fashion, and he didn't learn anything about the actual sneaker industry, but he weaseled his way in, and he kind of subverted the siloed path that the FIT was leading him down. And it was just so hard because you really have to network hard and kind of step outside of what you spend all this money going towards. And the topic of shoes, it can involve people in ID, it can involve people in fashion, it can involve people in business, it can involve people in architecture. So why do we try to silo that when you could have a sculptor design great shoes? Like, what is the fear in hiring a sculptor to work in your shoe department or whatever department for your shoe company? So in my idealized world, you just have this pool of designers. You just declare to the world when you're 18 or 20 or whatever, I'm a designer. And, you work on your portfolio. You have some sort of speakeasy type places like Saturn Atelier, where you can kind of dabble in a bunch of different kind of things, and you're building your portfolio so you can do government work, or you can go work for a company for a couple of years, but you're kind of tied to this design guild in a way. And a big question about that is, okay, so how do you get licensed architects? How do you get verifiably good graphic designers, industrial designers, interior designers? I think obviously as you turn 30 and 40, you specialize. When you're given the opportunity to really dabble, you get the opportunity to really hone in on what you actually are drawn to. So by your 30s or 40s, it's like, okay, now I'm going to sit down, take these classes. I can demonstrate with a certificate that I deserve to profess these designers. So you become a professor in a way. So yeah, once you're old, you can get licensed and people can learn under you. But you have this solid foundation of this multidisciplinary design, and you can begin to have a community conversation in that regard. So yeah. So I guess my kind of final point is, how do you truly facilitate the multidisciplinary design pool? I've talked about how it happens and what it would do, but how do you actually facilitate that in a city like all I know is Charlotte? So maybe this happens in New York, maybe this happens in LA, but I think you have events like Creative Morning Charlotte to kind of break the siloed designers out and learn about the community designers. You, I mean, even in my office, people are like wowed that I know photographers, wowed that I know painters in the city. Like, it's these people. I mean, it's really interesting how siloed everything really is, and the reasons it works that way is for efficiency and um, better availability of talent. You really kind of have to be siloed to be good at your job. It's, so I guess maybe being more honest, like at my job, I'm happy with how little bit of creativity I get to do at my job because it saves me for after work and running Saturn. Um, there are times where my creativity is tapped, but for the firm I work for, it's not the biggest thing. You really just have to be organized. And it's not really something. I mean, it's something you learn going through college, but it's not a design specific proclivity, you know. So if we can loosen up these employers, you know, and employers are funny. Like, they look over their shoulder so much. They, you know, they could hire a painter to be an architectural technician, which is my role. But it's like, okay, will HR laugh? Will, you know, my higher ups be like, what are you doing? Why are you hiring somebody that didn't go to college to do this supposed college degree job, you know? But it's like, why not? What are the rules here? Obviously, you want somebody that's looking for their architectural license, so they're kind of hooked into your company or whatever. But for the jobs that don't really require it, it's like, why not break the mold a little bit? Why not hire a graphic designer? If you're a community organization, why not hire a graphic designer to do your marketing that only has worked for Boone Oakley? It's just like both these entities, the employer, community, and government entities, should just loosen up a little bit as to who they're hiring at a young age. I mean, sure, when you're hiring managers and creative directors and such, obviously you need a resume at that point. But when you're fresh out of college, why does it matter? So as far as the community side of things, like I said, creative mornings, creative evenings, how about that? Creative evenings. Because of the siloed workers and the community workers, it's actually really hard to get to creative morning, Charlotte. A lot of community designers have second jobs. You know, they work a retail job or something where they can't just take off. It's like 2 hours. It's such an awkward time. It's like 9 to 10:30 on a Friday morning. It's like, who's taking off that little bit of time? And it's a monthly event, so you kind of want to make it each month. So how do you even facilitate that? Some siloed designers can do that, and their company encourages that. But some, it's like, you know, how do I even really do that? It's a whole 2 to 3 hours of my morning. Like, so it's actually hard to get to those. So I would propose that the creative mornings, just do it on Saturday morning. What's the harm, you know? But you have one other idea is perhaps art galleries should be also industrial design galleries, architecture galleries, industrial interior design, graphic design galleries. Like what Camp North End did, have a competition for architects or have a competition for graphic designers. Like, open up the community to these siloed designers. And that was kind of the power of the Camp North End competition, is that you have all of this community exposure to people that are generally siloed in their design, happy, productive, on quote unquote the right path, well paid members of the community, but nobody knows their name because they just go to work and produce every day. But now all of a sudden, you know people's names a little bit. It's like, oh, they actually did some work that I can drive by. And, that's the funny thing about it is like, if we had these siloed designers working in the city on city projects, they would be shaping the city, and you should know their name. But because we're so siloed in our jobs and in our kind of social